Welcome to today's session that is brought to you live from the French residence. Today, we have a session on why Europe needs to care about the blue waters. This roundtable session was organized by the French ambassador. The French ambassador has collected a really impressive group of experts that will be discussing today with you the strategic importance of the blue waters of Europe. So before I start going and addressing the topic a little bit more and going to explain to you all who is seated here at the table, let me first start off by introducing myself. I am Miriam Brandy-Amantas. I'm an assistant professor in international security studies. I'm a bit of an unusual suspect here because I'm Army, but I am surrounded by all maritime experts here today. So what we will be addressing here today is the theme is, as I said before, the role of Europe in protecting its blue waters. And actually the strategic importance of it has been illustrated with the pandemic. The pandemic illustrated to all of us that if the sea lines of communication will not be protected, we are extremely vulnerable, as has been illustrated by the closing of the land borders, as has been illustrated by the closing of the airspace. But also, we are faced with maritime hotspots in the Gulf of Guinea. Our economic trade routes are endangered. There are so many threats that are currently facing us in the maritime domain. So I'm so excited to be introducing you to our distinguished guests here today. That will be addressing this topic. Let me start off with introducing our main guest of honor actually today, Admiral Van Jay. Admiral Van Jay has a very, very impressive track record of over 30 years in the French Navy. He's currently Chief of Staff of the French Navy, and he is here today addressing the European issues to you. But before we continue, I want to outline all the impressive operations that the Admiral actually has combat experience in Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq. I'm trying to memorize all of them because I read them, but you've been all over. You've also commanded the air carrier Charles de Gaulle. You've been deployed twice. You've actually also anticipated and worked on the hostages which you liberated, if I remember correctly. So over 30 years, ladies and gentlemen, of experience in the French Navy. Then we have on my left side to your right side, we have the ambassador of Denmark. Very welcome to you as well. You, Ambassador Horslund, is not only the ambassador of Denmark to the Netherlands, but he's also a maritime expert and security. He's been appointed on this position because, as you might know, Denmark has offered a vessel which will be deployed this autumn to the Gulf of Guinea. And next to the ambassador, we have Mr. Van Beckers, who is from the Hague Center of Strategic Studies. He has currently written a very impressive report for the Dutch Navy and trying to address the capabilities the Dutch Navy needs from 2020 to 2035. He's been involved in many research reports with regards to the military, not only with the Hague Center of Strategic Studies, but also with other research parties. Then to my right, Mr. Hans ten Broeke. Mr. Hans ten Broeke is the political director of the Hague Center of Strategic Studies. He has a very impressive career as a member of parliament for over 12 years and is now connected to the Hague Center of Strategic Studies, addressing various political issues. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us here today. We will first start off with a keynote speech of the Admiral. The Admiral will be addressing following issues to you. He will discuss the European maritime identity throughout the ages, and then he will continue and he will discuss the sea as a new Western, as an area of confrontation. But let's stay positive, because the Admiral will conclude by sharing some perspectives of hope with regard to this area of confrontation. Admiral, again, thank you very much for being here today, and we are very much looking forward to your talk.
Thank you for your invitation. So my task today is to try to think about why Europe should care about blue waters. I'm very honored to speak to you, and I consider myself very lucky to be the first speaker, since your attention span is still at peak. I will try not to tire you with my accents, which I know I should improve. Europe has significant naval assets, a very wide historic maritime culture, and a number of common concerns in terms of maritime security and defense. It does not always have the will or the strike force that we would like it to have, but it can boost some naval successes. Europe is facing new challenges. It must continue to adapt to an ever-changing world, to find ways to employ its tools even more effectively, and to be ready to confront adversaries that are increasingly formidable. So I will answer the question in 3 points. First point is to speak about the European maritime identity. As I've already alluded to, ours is historic maritime culture, beginning with the Greek merchant communities sailing the Mediterranean Sea in ancient times. In the Middle Ages, and in particular during the 14th century, the maritime dimension in the Mediterranean became so critical that certain cities gained their autonomy from the imperial powers thanks to their naval prowess. They were called the Republicio Marinare. Pisa, Amalfi, Venice, and Genoa made the Mediterranean the theater of their political, economy, and military life. Consider, for example, that Genoa in 1295 was composed of 200 galleys and 4,000 men. This is approximately the size of the French Navy today. In the 15th century, in Germanic and Slavic Europe, the Hanseatic League was at its peak. It had secured a virtual monopoly on trade in the Baltic and North Seas, from Novgorod to London via Riga, Lübeck, Bruges, and Hamburg. Its influence extended by land to southern Germany and by sea to Italy, France, Spain, and Portugal. The League had thousands of ships, weighing a total of 60,000 tons. At the beginning of the 16th century, the Portuguese sailed around the Cape of Good Hope, set foot in India, and then continued through East Asia. They dominated the spice route from Lisbon to the Moluccas, thanks to a policy of armed trade, relying on a network of 40 forts and trading outposts from the eastern coast of Africa to Nagasaki in Japan. During the latter half of the 16th century, the Spanish took advantage of the commercial exchanges between Europe, the Philippines, and Mexico before European power dynamics shifted once again in favor of Dutch. Dutch maritime power rose to prominence during the 17th century, when the VOC, the Dutch Company of the Indies, driven by the dual objective of trade with Asia and war against the enemies of the new republic, gradually surpassed the Portuguese and the Spanish. It was during this era that Hugo Grotius, in his 1609 essay Mare Liberum, asserted that the sea was free for navigation and used by all. No country has the right to exclude another thanks to the absence of borders at sea. The French East India Company also dates from this period. Finally, the British, via the East India Company, managed to overrun the Dutch positions during the second half of the 17th century, with success that one may still observe today in the Commonwealth. In short, the peoples of Europe have long understood the importance of the sea. They have developed a notable collective maritime history and have for centuries appreciated that this domain must remain free and open for all to utilize. It is an understanding that has once again been proven valid. One need look no further than the recent COVID crisis, as you say, or the temporary blockage of the Suez Canal to see the importance of the domain. Conversely, some nations have begun to alter the ways in which they use the maritime domain. The question for Europe is how to adapt to this new reality rather than being left behind. This is my second point. The sea is becoming a scene of the new Wild West. For some years now, we have been witnessing the illegal use of the sea for strategic purposes. Just as in some public parks in France, where incivilities are multiplying, the Mare Liberum is no longer the shared free common space regulated by international law that it was 20 years ago. It is the playground of new malign actors, the site of a new Wild West. The sea has once again become a space of confrontation after a period of peace that followed the Cold War. The order that once prevailed is being challenged, openly or not, by disruptive actors who work outside the international regulatory framework to serve their own interests, taking care to always remain below the threshold of armed conflict, in a zone that nuclear deterrence cannot cover. Disruptions take many forms: conquering new territories, using fait accompli, non-compliance with UN embargoes, piracy or brigandage, plundering of natural resources. What is not monitored is visited. What is visited is plundered, and what is plundered always ends up being contested. Disruptive actors do not always face effective countermeasures, as a credible conventional deterrent would bring. If we would stop the disorder caused by thugs in public parks, we must ensure that the police make regular rounds and the police must be able to enforce the laws. We must place street lights and cameras in the dark streets of the global commons, and we must be able to act therein where then needed. The strategic evolution of the seas is expressed in the rapid remilitarization of the maritime domain. While European nations, content with the peace dividends that followed the disintegration of the Soviet bloc, were drastically reducing their defense budgets, other states were investing massively, particularly in the naval domain. Most notably, China has had the largest fleet in the world for several months and is now challenging American supremacy. Russia is investing in high value-added technologies and is now causing security problems for European nations. And obviously, there has been a natural reaction from states concerned at first stand about this rearmament. The United States, Australia, Great Britain, India, Indonesia. And I notice, however, that no European Union state has yet taken part in this naval surge. In addition to the age-old issues of resource security and the free and open use of the seas for commercial purposes, we also may add the environmental challenge. Although all states are aware of this issue, they do not prioritize it all in the same way. Consequently, the investments made are also variable. Nevertheless, in the decades to come, we may face significant global crises. The lack of commitment of some countries may in itself become a source of conflict, in addition to the instabilities induced by climate change, violent meteorological events, submergence of inhabited lands, modification of coastlines, requiring colossal infrastructure works, displacement of fish populations, and regional and human migration. But what is Europe doing? And this is my third point: perspectives and reasons for hope. The challenges that Europe must face at sea are numerous and diverse in nature. The naval dimension of European defense is essential for the reasons I have mentioned, but it is all the more complex to implement because the states are implicated in varying degrees and their naval capabilities vary greatly. It is both an important and complicated question. There is no easy solution. All means are lacking and our interests are not always immediately convergent. However, it seems to me that there are reasons to be optimistic. Europe has made real efforts in recent years to find appropriate solutions, and this is what we must continue to do. We have no choice but to have a well-stocked and ready-to-use toolbox. Some of the tools we design have greatly already demonstrated their effectiveness. Operation Atalanta may be the only multinational operation in decades that has reached its desired end state. Operation Agenor has also had the desired effect. While still in its early stages, CMP, the Coordinated Maritime Presence, is already optimizing the use of our assets and deserves to be expanded. Sharing maritime information is unanimously supported. We are therefore able to conduct long-term European operations, to launch effective ad hoc operations to control sea lengths of communication and choke points when commercial shipping is threatened. We contribute to global maritime security by sharing information. We must continue along this path, which enables us to meet the majority of our needs today and the lower end of the operational spectrum. In conclusion, that being said, these victories are fragile. We must cultivate our collective will among European seafarers that goes beyond political, industrial, economic, and diplomatic storms. The management of the global commons, such as the sea, requires the management of the global commons, such as the sea, requires a common vision of those who know this environment best. The lower end of the spectrum corresponds to conventional police deterrence in the public part, but that it should not preclude the possibility of a major confrontation in the years to come. The French Navy is preparing for this possibility in accordance with the strategic vision that I published last January and whose name I enjoy sharing it with you here. It's called Mercator 2021 Vision. It seemed necessary to me to pay tribute to a great Flemish mathematician, geographer, and cartographer. In order to prepare for high-intensity conflict, interoperability, joint training, and the demonstration of the credibility of our assets are essential prerequisites. This is the path that France has taken in the Indo-Pacific, and let us hope that the European strategy for this zone will lead all our navies to do likewise. Finally, the environmental issue brings us together. We have the means, we have the ideas, and we have already undertaken actions to protect biodiversity. The proactive action of European navies in this issue must be seen as a global lighthouse to make it as a subject of unity and not let it divide the international community even more.
Edmund, thank you very much. Also, thank you for calling upon all us, especially as we're here today as coastal states of the European Union, and calling upon our collective will to protect. Having said that, we will move on to the next guest, who's actually trying to emphasize the need for protection of our European assets. So thank you once more, and we will get back in the Q&A questions to you about your lecture. Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to you, Frank. You will be addressing to the audience the protection of our European assets. You have a presentation, which is it currently?
Let's hope so, yeah. Well, in my short pitch, I would like to draw your attention to the maritime security, not far off places, we will come back to that, but to our own maritime backyard, the North Sea, literally at a stone throw away here from where we sit at the French embassy. In the next couple of minutes, I would lead you through the following argument. The next decade will see a steep increase in activities here in the North Sea, including processes that are vital for the economies of the coastal states, but also indeed for the whole of the European Union. As the size, diversity, and importance of sea-based assets and activities increase, so do the entry points for criminal and terrorist activities, and for disturbances and attacks by state actors. Therefore, guaranteeing the security of and in the North Sea requires more attention and potentially whole new approaches. My final point in the argument is, since security challenges do not stop at the borders of the exclusive economic zones in the North Sea, security solutions must be found in an international context. Let us first look at this congestion at sea. Densely populated coastal regions are looking for ways to alleviate growing spatial pressures on land by pushing activities to sea. And the North Sea increasingly becomes a congested area, with growing tensions between static and dynamic users of the sea and its resources. While sea transport remains a backbone of European global trade, the room for ship movements is more and more restricted by static users. In particular, offshore wind parks not only chip away at navigation space at sea, but also create additional traffic by construction and maintenance vessels. And the map that's been shown clearly shows that the North Sea has many competing users and usages. Infrastructure at sea becomes vitally important for the North Sea countries, as for instance, a substantial part of the electric power will be generated at sea. And as more and more vital infrastructure is constructed at sea, vulnerabilities will grow. There are, for example, concrete plans to construct artificial islands in the North Sea, where infrastructure for electric grids, data centers, and green hydrogen production can be combined. Such artificial islands would constitute extremely high value targets that may well draw close attention from malicious actors. In addition, automation and connectedness is the name of the game, also in the maritime realm. Unmanned energy platforms and remotely controlled or autonomous ships are technically feasible and indeed are already in use or experimented with. Cyber attacks constitute as much a critical problem in the maritime context as it is on land. These vulnerabilities of infrastructure at sea can be exploited by malicious actors, ranging from criminal and terrorist groups via hybrid actors that largely operate covertly to state actors using the more traditional military means. So we often associate maritime security with threats in far-off places, such as the Gulf of Aden, Piracy, the west coast of Africa, insurgents acting, also Piracy, or in the Chinese seas, where we have disputes over territorial rights and freedom of navigation. But in the current era, great power competition and grey zones confrontations may play out right under our noses in our own maritime backyards. Global security starts at home. Threats such as organized crime, international terrorism, and great power competition are international by nature. Maritime traffic, undersea cables and pipelines run across national EEZs. It follows that there's a lot to be gained by European cooperation of coast guards. And Frontex, the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, is currently focused on the Mediterranean. But my point is that Frontex may also provide an important framework for increased Coast Guard cooperation in the North Sea as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime. And we shall now move on to Ambassador Horslow. So as I said before, is not only the ambassador to this country, but is also the special representative for maritime security. You've been in the news there for operating a vessel counter-piracy operation for the Gulf of Guinea. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, merci beaucoup. I'm very honored to be invited to sit in this esteemed panel. I'm not an expert, as you actually said before, but only a diplomat, and I'm appointed as special representative to deal with diplomatic issues related to maritime security. I would like to answer the question of this webinar, why this is important for Europe. And it's actually a simple answer, I think, because we need to keep the blue waters open. And we all have an interest in that, whether we have a commercial fleet or not. The free trade, we depended on that, all of us in Europe. So it is a question for all European countries. So there are many threats, as we heard about, and we have a common interest in addressing those threats. I think Admiral Vangier and also you, Frank, really described this pretty well. I'll jump to the next page. Now, but one of the threats, of course, is piracy. And we saw that in the Gulf of Aden. We saw how much you could actually disrupt world trade. And it was hurting our economies. And more important, I think, it also, of course, was a direct threat to some people, namely the seafarers, and that is a big problem. We basically managed so far to deal with that threat in the Gulf of Aden. We have there are hardly any attacks anymore because of a rather hefty international presence there. Of course, the Atalanta European one, and then also the US-led sort of operation is still going on. I'm not so sure that we won't see more from that area. If you look at the situation on land, it can actually develop. We also now see some threats also going out into the sea, so to speak, outside of Mozambique these days. But today, most of the piracy is taking place in the Gulf of Guinea. We have a particular interest there because Denmark is a big we do have the 5th largest commercial fleet in the world. And we have more than or around 30 vessels in the Gulf of Guinea every single day. Can be 40, can be 50, but that's the average. And therefore, all these attacks from pirates are, threatening our commercial fleet and others. And we have seen really nasty attacks from the pirates in the area. And they are also, it's a different situation because in the Gulf of Guinea, it's not like outside of Somalia. Somalia, I think it's okay, even in an open webinar, to say it was a failed nation state at that time. That's not the case in the Gulf of Guinea. We have functioning states as the coastal states. But in spite of that, I would say 95% of all pirate attacks nowadays are actually taking place in that area. And we see, luckily, vessels, gray vessels from France, Italy, Spain, and Portugal being present there. So my government made the decision also to send a frigate to the area. It was approved by the Danish Parliament Monday this week. And it will be there sometime in November, and for 5 or 6 months ahead, it will have a helicopter on board, special troops, and we want, of course, to be able to cooperate with those other countries that are in the area, and as importantly, we are going to cooperate very closely with the coastal states in order to make this function. Now, this is just one attempt to deal with the sort of acute threat to the commercial fleets. The pirate season, that's actually a seasonal sort of trend there, is actually from November to March. So this is why we have chosen to send a ship, a frigate, in that time. But it's also important to participate in the build-up of the capacity of the coastal states, and we'll do that together with many other countries. And the EU, in fact, is doing quite a lot. What I would like to see as a special representative on maritime security is a much more coordinated effort. And there, the European Union has just launched what they call it, a pilot project called Coordinated Maritime Presence, CMP. We all for that. And we also need to have, maybe for those actually going there with gray ships, it's better than warships, that we can coordinate so the commercial ships will be able to call a number and somebody will come to their rescue. But that's maybe the next step. We'll be working on that as well. But capacity building, information sharing onshore is also extremely important. We all do quite a lot. We can do more to make it work better. And that is the second sort of leg of my job also. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Ambassador. We will have some time later on to be discussing the French initiatives, the Danish initiatives, and the possible Dutch initiatives. So we have some time to tackle that later on. I will now move on to you, Mr. Luca. You will be addressing the European strategic sovereignty, and the floor is yours. I understood you want to intervene also and make some comments on the speech of the admiral.
Please. Thank you so much. And merci beaucoup. Enchanté. I'm Hantem Luque. I have to immediately disappoint you because I'm also not an expert on maritime affairs. I'm not even a diplomat. So in this particular group, my only claim to fame is that I actually wrote a law on maritime issues, which was a law that made it possible for Dutch commercial fleet to not only hire maritime forces, maritime soldiers, so the Navy, in order to prevent piracy from happening to our commercial fleet, which is not as big as yours, admittedly so, but still rather reasonable. But to also allow private detachments to do that. It was essential for the Netherlands to do this because many of these shipping companies left our flag, as you probably know. And since when you're at open sea, you can't call the police, we needed to have something extra. So this is my claim to fame in terms of naval expertise. The admiral went a bit into the history, and what I found so interesting is that he said that there is a naval identity. Now, obviously, you pick your words wisely, saying that in a country that has not just its history, but its identity very much deriving from our fight against the sea. Although we're a small country, we do understand that whoever owns the sea actually also rules the land. So, and since we didn't have much land, we actually enlarged it a little bit. Nothing big, as you know. And something interesting struck me. Maybe you allow me to read this to you. This is the Blue Water Strategy that was, that I discovered on the internet. Hear me out for a minute. Many military commentators regard the Blue Water Strategy as the key to, I will not call the nation's name, the nation's past success, and useful for the approach for, I would almost say, China in the immediate future. Blue Water Strategy calls for superior navy, which is in wartime can secure the homeland, isolate strategic areas overseas, carry small, well-trained ground formation into action at any opportune moments. The inherent flexibility of the Navy enables the nation to strike at the enemy overseas possession or at selected portions of the foe's homeland. Blue water strategy also allows the nation to avoid major land battles until it decides the time and the place for the confrontation. Now, this looks like a page from the strategy of China. Come on. This is actually 1974. It's a page from the British Navy blue water strategy. So my challenge to the Admiral is, what did really change since? Maybe only one thing, and that is what we need to discuss here. What needs to change is our European attitude towards open water. You mentioned Hugo Grotius. I could mention several wars that we've been in, for example, with the Brits in the 17th century. I think there were about 3 wars. On the sea, we beat them, but in the end, they even got, well, not all the time. We sometimes
1 out of 4.
1 out of 4, we beat them. And then we even lost New York because under the threat of, I think it was French forces on the land. So in a way, we derived 3 conclusions from this. The first conclusion is, whatever Britain lost in Europe at the time, they won overseas. I think they face a similar situation and challenge right now, but times have changed. 2, blue water dominance is probably not enough for a small country. So Denmark and Netherlands better hook up in the right alliance. And the third is, and I'm saying this because we're at the invitation here of the French ambassador, that French diplomacy always trumps the rest. Seriously, I think, and both the Danish ambassador as well as my colleague from HCSS have already said this, and it goes to the heart, I think, of your argument, which is, what are we going to do as a European continent? I think we should actually act up. The time for pilots, projects is over. We cannot, as a European continent, we cannot linger anymore. Let's just take one example, Libya, for example. Libya is a problem of our own making. The French had a lot to do with it. Britain had a lot to do with it. We went in there, we needed American support still. This is why I don't like the term strategic autonomy, because I think to strive for autonomy is a bit of an illusion. But we should act up first and foremost, and in the naval domain. Foreign policy is what we need, but it's very difficult for Europe to get aligned. So let's start close by. Let's start to do foreign policy as a foreign border policy. Let's start with a border policy. Wouldn't that be a good idea? Libya, for example, we need coherence in our foreign policy objectives. It's hard to get that done between France and Italy, for example. At the same time, I applaud you for your actions the other year near Cyprus, where we were, can we say we? At least we showed a little bit of firmness. I applaud France for taking the initiative when the Brits, with the change of government to the current government, have taken the lead on our presence in the Gulf. And I'm looking forward to a freedom of navigation operation in Asia, not just with the Brits, but also with France. But let's start with the domain that we can actually exercise our influence on. Why not start with I would almost say a militarized external border policy, which means that we have to act up with Frontex much further than we've done so far. Frontex has grown. It's about 1,000 people now there. 350 million euros, but in terms of our foreign policy priorities, that doesn't cut it. We need to do more. And naval countries like France, like Denmark, and like the Netherlands, I think should take the lead in this. But this is my challenge to the debate today. I would like to see Frontex to be a much more firm organization than it is currently. And we need it for migration purposes and all kinds of other security threats on foreign borders. Once again, because foreign border challenges are foreign policy challenges.
Thank you. Admiral, would you like to respond to not only these remarks, but also the other interventions?
I have just a remark about Frontex, because we experienced it in the Med. It's a legal finish problem. So you can patrol, you can monitor the seas, you can see what's going on, and share information. If we want to act, you need legal support. And today is the main problem with Frontex. If you seize a ship, well, you don't have the right to do it. You can't board, you can't keep people. So today there is not a legal tool which allows Frontex to do the job it's supposed to do. And so it's the reason why we run to CMPs, for example, in the Gulf of Guinea, because in fact, if you want to have the legal finish, in any case you make, you need to have the flag of the country. You need the Article 17 to be applied to hold the country and say, I'd like to board. And so you can seize the drugs, you can seize the drugs and so forth. So I think, as you say, the purpose of Frontex is a good one, but to date, and my point in for foreseeable future, we don't have the ability to make it be a real legal tool. And
Would France be willing to take in under their the chairmanship the EU next year?
Yeah.
Would France be willing to dive into this, maybe together with the Netherlands? Because I know the legal argument has been coming forward time and time again. And we know if we look at the treaty, the TFEU, Article 77 to 79 is actually giving the right to Frontex, but it's not enough. As you say, you can't board, you can't do pushbacks. All the things that a Coast Guard comparable to, for example, Australia can, we can't do. So what we need is an initiative from a big country.
I should like to ask our ambassador if France will run that in its presidency. I think it's a huge task because it's relies with Montego Bay issues. So Montego Bay and Convention recognize states with flags and not Europe. So what Europe can do is what the example of the Gulf of Guinea. We created in France MICA Center, which is a Maritime Information Coordination Awareness Center, where the Denmark participates with Portugal, with Spain, and so we are able to provide to all the commercial ships in the Gulf of Guinea an accurate time-to-time information. And then through the CMP, we are able to coordinate our efforts, both to be there to patrol, but unable to do any legal finish, or it's quite difficult with states or there, but to help the countries to build their own autonomy, their own tools to deal with the piracy, with instability. And what I noticed is this year, as far as the ships were thinking they were safe 200 miles of the coast, today, thanks to the effort, they are now traveling along the coast, the limit of the territorial waters, because they know that the tools the African countries have built gives them less time to be secured if they have pirates aboard. So I think it's going pretty well in a good way, and the arrival of other ships and the Denmark one is very good news. Very good news. We need to coordinate, and with the tools we have today, we can do much more. And it could be the same. We spoke about Atalanta mission. I think we have quite the same still challenge to securitize our lines of communication between Suez Canal and the Indian Ocean. As you know, since 18 months, we have more than 11 tankers that have exploded around the Red Sea or the Eastern Med. And so protecting our lines of communication by being there. So what I say in my talk is putting lights, street lights, because when you are there, you can name, you can blame, you can attribute. And so for Europeans, it's quite easy to do. We have quite good ships, we have data links, and so we can do that. And then when we know, we blame, and then we can go to the United Nations, we can go to Europeans and force a political response.
if I can just add one thing that combines what you just said together with the anti-piracy operations that we've seen. In the Netherlands, we were quite reluctant to go under European flag for any type of operation. Atalanta has changed this, because in terms of command and control, and also the operations and communications lines, I think Atalanta was superior to Open Shield. This is, in the Dutch way of thinking, has made quite a difference. Also for my colleagues in the parliament, myself, in order to okay further operations on the European flag.
Would you like to respond to that, sir?
Yeah, let me be open and frank about this, because you probably know Denmark has an opt-out of the defense dimension. Therefore, we will not be able to be under EU command, but we can be in cooperation with other EU countries as well as some coming from elsewhere. Therefore, we do like the CMP because it's structured in a way that allows for a network of ships that would like to do the same. Therefore, we're not in the Atalanta, but the other operation outside of the Gulf of what we were not right now.
Yeah.
So that's a different thing. We also in the NSO, as you know, in the Strait of Hormuz, that's a completely different operation together with you. So that is our issue, unfortunately. And ask any politician in government in Denmark whether they like it or they opt out or not.
That is the name of the game. But I'm in favor of total opportunity. So that is also the name of the game.
Because we've been talking about EU cooperation between the EU member states. Of course, the sea lines of communication to the Far East passes through areas that are controlled by different nations.
Yeah.
So protection of sea lines of communication across the world requires cooperation between a host of nations, not just European ones. So we need constructions that are open and inclusive, that are not just European.
Even PESCO has that now, of course. But
Exactly.
Remember, we invite non-EU nations into that. But so an opportunist way of getting to your challenge, the challenge that you described so eloquently, I think is the only way forward, because we all apparently agree on the fact that we need to act. I mean, there are so many actors, free riders, disruptors, as you described them, that there is no alternative to acting.
Yes, I completely agree. And as you say, tools as CMP allow a lot of flexibility. It's very different from land issues. When you send troops, it's the tooth-based theory. When you put it off, it's very difficult to get it. But with ships, it's very easy to gather, then to be in another place. It's very flexible, and I think it's affordable for a lot of capitals because you have a good ratio between what you gain and what you risk. The cost is easy to manage. And so I think in the world we are working in, it's something which would take great benefit for we Europeans.
While we are talking, many questions are arriving at my phone. So please do not think also back home that I'm being impolite while watching on my phone. I am constantly monitoring the questions that are coming in. Also to our guests at home, if you still have questions, you can send them in. They're arriving at my phone. Would you like to start with some of the questions at the moment? Because I think some people in the audience would like to hear your response. And of course from you gentlemen as well. Let me start off with the first question that was sent to me. Is there a course of action to include a maximum of EU state members in the different challenges related to blue waters?
As we began to discuss, I think we have 3 blades on our knife. The first one is the PSDC tools. So we have dedicated operations. And so it works pretty well. It was the Atalanta mission. Then we have coordinated maritime presence, which can include other non-PESCO members. And then we have the other ad hoc coalitions as we did, for example, in the Gulf with the Ageno mission, which is non-UV mission, but which gathers all the willing states that want to stabilize and not antagonize the situation in the area. So these three tools have proven themselves effective. And so, in fact, it's only a matter of political discussion, who wants to do something. And I think the good point is that we are more and more countries willing to do something.
Okay, thank you. Let me move on then to a question that was already sent to us prior to this whole discussion, and sent to a colleague from the MOD. He would like to know, how does the panel proceduralization of the Indo-Pacific strategy, especially the changes that the EU will initiate on a maritime area of interest in the Western Indian Ocean, overlapping the area of interest of Atalanta? And this question comes from the Dutch MOD.
Yes, I think we say that the Chinese are developing very fast on the Silk routes. Especially, we discussed this morning with the chief of the Netherlands Navy, the size of the base they built in Djibouti, which is huge. More than 3,000 people could be hosted in the base. They have a wharf they gave for carriers. They may have ammunition storage there, and so we Europeans need to not let the gaps being filled by someone else, and especially by the Chinese. So I think a lot of us have been committed in the area during the operation at Atalanta. We run a lot of ships, and also a lot of navies know the area, and so I think we need to think about how we Europeans be there for a long-term presence. And so what I hope that we will be able to see the future of the Atalanta mission outside of the piracy issues, because as you say, we are for the moment rid of it. But we see that the Ageno mission is probably at its end, or the future may be discussed because tensions are lower, but we all need to be there. And so I think, I hope that next year there will be a discussion between Europeans, Dutch panel, to say what kind of presence we do want to have in the western part of the Indian Ocean.
Thank you. Any of the other panelists would like to comment on that question?
No, I mean, this is a pretty technical question, how various operations overlap. But in a general sense, we need to discuss amongst ourselves as Europeans how far our reach lies, because we have very limited capabilities in the naval field. We cannot protect the whole lines, sea lines, the thousands of sea miles of sea lines of communication. There are a lot of other actors that share the same interest in anti-piracy. We've worked together with the Chinese, with Indians on anti-piracy missions. We share the same interest. We need to really discuss how far our responsibilities as Europe lie, and where we can interact and work together with others in this whole maritime security, this wide maritime security.
There's a lot of emphasis already within the European Union on the Indo-Pacific area. And I will see more of that, there's no doubt. And how we're going to deal with it, we'll wait and see. Also, CMP is there on the table already. I would like to add, if I may, coming from an Arctic country with part of our kingdom in the Arctic area. That's another part that we have to be focusing on. And we will have a new so-called defense agreement in Denmark. Can't remember when they will finish it, but negotiations started, and there's no doubt that our Navy will be strengthened with something. I don't dare to say how many ships, but some. That's a guess, and I'm allowed to do that. Okay. Friday afternoon.
Well, speaking on a Friday afternoon, there is a challenging question that, of course, often comes up, if not always, when we talk about EU. There is, of course, a question on NATO, and it says here comes a question on fully understand this person says, the nature of future risks and challenges, and the need for a bigger EU engagement. However, she argues we cannot avoid, again, the questions on the NATO role, how to avoid duplication effort, and how to ensure close cooperation on maritime issues. And she also argues that we need to have in mind that EU maritime interests in the High North, she mentioned, are of the utmost importance for Norway and its non-EU allies, the UK and Norway. Would you like to start off, sir? Or should I?
Yesterday, I was in NATO headquarters, and I had a meeting with the SACEUR chief of staff, and we had exactly this kind of discussion. I think 15 years ago, there was quite a competition between NATO and EU because they were acting in the same range of missions. And so crisis management, Petersburg missions, they were in competition. And so nobody understood it clearly what was the advantage of each other. Today, I think as far as NATO is turning to deterrence, DDA concept, I think in fact things are aligning quite well. You have high-stand military missions which are dedicated to deter. So you need an organization, military organization. You need high-stand actors. You need battalion, you need satellites, intel, and so forth. And this is really a military coalition, and it makes sense to gather to do that. And you have other missions which are in the range of what Europe can do, because they need legal finish, because they need to take into account environment, economy, resources, global warming, and all this range of missions that can be addressed by UE, and they are not in competition with NATO. So I think today it's much more complementary than it has been in the past 20 years.
Thank you. And I'll take the challenge.
Well, I fully agree with that. What we see in the, let's say, the official lingo, a couple of years ago, discussion about capabilities and tasks was in EU or NATO.
Yeah.
The current lingo is EU and NATO. And that's a play of words to some extent, but it is an expression of how people tend to think. In the EU, of course, in NATO, as European countries within NATO, we need to think about scenarios where the US is engaged elsewhere, is not willing or not capable or not able to contribute to our security problems. So we need to think about NATO acting in European theater without too much US support. And now we come very close to the EU. Of course, there is a little bit of discrepancy between the member states, between the two organizations, but there's a huge overlap. Of course, the UK is sort of the odd one out now of the large countries, but still. So yeah, basically what we see is that the discussion has turned to EU and NATO working together rather than as in a competition. Yeah.
If I may add just one more, I think the Admiral struck a very good point. We should actually get on a little bit with this debate that has now been putting us down for the last 10, 12 years almost. I mean, the whole thing about complicity and complementarity, duplication is, of course, still of essence, because what we compare here is a military organization with skills and drills that all our countries by now know, versus what is essentially a civilian organization. But the two, of course, need each other. I would almost say not NATO versus EU, not even NATO with the EU, but maybe EU within NATO. In the old idea of a European pillar within NATO, I think gets more and more traction. We need to first and foremost make sure that we can start spending the budget that we said we were going to spend. We can also take care of some of the anxieties of our American friends. Maybe the Admiral can shed some light on this, but I was always baffled to see that, for example, in the Libya operation, we needed the Fifth Fleet, also the headquarters in Naples. At the same time, we have American Sixth Fleet in Rosa. I would say that some of these assets the Americans could well use in other theaters around the world, whereas we could take care of our own in our own hemisphere. To leave that to the Americans is also a bit of almost say it's a bit of we have to now take care of our own security, our own continental security. That to me is strategic sovereignty. That is not without the Americans. It is with the Americans where they are willing and capable. But we first and foremost have to look at ourselves: budget, resources, capabilities, and we do have those capabilities first and foremost in the naval domain.
But in the naval domain, there is also a lot of discussion within the EU, because there is also necessarily a common interest of all EU member states. So that also at times hinders the further of a strategy.
But we like the concept of coalitions of the willing, which you have now.
Yes. Naval assets are very flexible. Since Napoleon in France, we experienced action d'État en mer, which is the state action at sea for enforcing policies, fishing, monitoring, pollution, and so far. And so the same frigate, which is getting on the way from Toulon, will participate to save some people, so immigration issues, to pollution, then run for a month in Iran, European mission, embargo mission, and then participate to standing force NATO, and go back to do some immigration or pollution.
Or humanitarian mission on your way
And
back.
so it's very consistent with the complexity of the particular level.
And we really need to get rid of, we have done a lot already, the static mindset. That if you have assigned a ship to a NATO exercise, it can only be there.
Yeah.
As you just pointed out, and will actually do a lot of things at the same time. So especially the Navy is very flexible. But we have had this tendency to look at where do we assign our troops, but they can be assigned to different setups, so to
Same happens
speak.
in the Netherlands.
Exactly. And that is important. And I do subscribe to your description and also yours, that it's not just a lingo, it's actually a change of mindset. We're looking very much in that direction you described, Europe within NATO. I don't know if that is the perfect way of putting it, but that's how I look at it.
We must not forget that NATO actually in some respects needs the EU, because the merger of instruments of power, where you bring together military, diplomatic, economic, informational power, is very much located within the EU and less so than in the military organization that NATO is. So in modern times scenarios where we mix those instruments of power, it's basically the EU that has in some respects a stronger position than or the more capable position than.
And to that, if we have the ambition to become a geopolitical power here, beyond the fact that we are a geo-economical power, so we can put some coercion to those around us in terms of trade and finance, if we're willing to, then there's of course the military aspect is always a bit difficult. So here comes in various degrees of cooperation. Once again, a bit at an opportunist principle, applying an opportunist principle.
Yeah.
And why not?
But I think that is the way forward, because to be quite honest, when we look at it, that might be very controversial, but when we look at the EU foreign policy, it's so difficult for us to really look at the Middle East in particular. And therefore, coalitions of the willing, we can do things, get things done without a lot of too many discussions that take too long time. So the opportunist sort of approach might be the one
you like.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, it's a deep change of seeing issues in Europe. Because I think after the fall of the wall, a lot of countries thought that Europe could solve problems they didn't want to solve at their own. So they say, we don't have a NATO, Europe or NATO will do. And today it's exactly the opposite. You need to want to do something and to do it together, which is in fact the essence of the coalition. And so we are back to this kind of subject where we with 2, 3, 4 countries are realizing that we need to do something and we need 2 assets, and we are stronger because we give assets. And so I think I said that to my minister 1 month ago. I said due to the tools we have today, which have been designed for peacetime, we will have to make strong choices where to put the effort, because we won't be able to do everything everywhere over the world. And so the way of thinking coalitions must change. It's not renouncement, it's acting together.
I think you're going to, just last point, I think you're going to visit tomorrow Thales, as I understand. You know that Thales has developed this smart L radar that we are very proud of. Has performed extremely well in exercises, also in war games together with our American friends. Now, if we put those assets together with the willingness of some nations, some European nations, either in or out NATO, to do anti-ballistic defense. The only thing, for example, that a country like the Netherlands, and I guess the same goes for Denmark, is lacking in shooter capacity because it's simply too expensive for us. Now here, we face a challenge, but that is a challenge that is easily overcome.
That's correct. And I think we have, and so it's a question of what's.
Do you think it's cheap?
No, but it's easily overcome, not so easily. Very technical sense. It's a difficult challenge to.
The budgetary.
Well, apart from the budget, but also the technical connection between the sensor and the shooter and the quick reaction times you need. But I'm sorry.
It's a very standard the question you what we the French understand as autonomy. It's not it's not being a part. It's being able to produce what we want and to not to be imposed to buy something we don't want to buy because it's the only thing on the market. And so since we have a nuclear deterrent, we built an industrial base which is able to give us this kind of technical industrial autonomy. And I think in Europe, and you spoke about Thales Netherlands with the radar, it's that kind of things we are thinking about. So we have bricks. Let's build the wall.
Exactly.
Talking about capacity, a very interesting question just came in. It's from Erik de Lange. First of all, compliments you all with your presentations, but he has an interesting question because he would like to know your view on the potential role of NGOs or non-state actors in the management of global maritime commons.
Did he get some specific example of that?
No?
I can give you one.
Yeah.
It's INM. You know, it's illegal non-named fishing. And so we have a partnership with NGOs because they do a great job in monitoring illegal fishing. And so for us, monitoring EEC, especially in the Pacific, we take great benefits of working with them because they help us to monitor huge spaces. And so, and we are on the same goal, which is protecting the sea resources. So especially for global warming, for biological surveys, for biodiversity, it's fine. We can take a great advantage of cooperation.
My mind would actually go to Airbus, another great company that you must visit. Maybe not this time, but next time. Where
the book is just promoting the Dutch industry.
Which so happens to have French influence as well, but isn't that Airbus together with TNO developed this laser communication that is also capable of detecting 6 to 7 greenhouse gases now. So that's for commercial shipping that is very much under new, more strict CO2 emission regulations. There will be that's an interesting.
And from your perspective, sir, have you thought about working with non-state actors or NGOs when it comes
No, they are very important. This kind of monitoring, of course, is important in itself, but let's take a look at the Gulf of Guinea for one moment again. Say that there is an economy for the pirates, but there is also another one for the protection industry, as I call it, there. And you need to establish an alternative business model. And their NGOs to be very actively doing that. Fisheries is one of them, also on the river up there, Niger River, and so on. they can be belonged in that economic field and also in education and so on. So all these things are connected to really want to deal with the piracy issue. But that was only one of them.
Yeah.
We have many things, pollutions in our oceans, and where they are already very active. So on. But that's a different security issue, of course.
Yeah, of course, not just NGOs, but private companies as well, so non-state actors basically, are very important in building up maritime situation awareness. When you look at the topic of my intervention, the North Sea, much of the early warning of incidents that are, or risks that are happening, much of that is from companies, not from official government agencies. So yeah, maritime situation awareness, also the analysis, the risk analysis, let's say forward-looking analysis of what might happen, which is part of strong security. That's very much happening in companies next to government agencies. So in a very general sense, maritime situation awareness is something that has to be built up with a lot of parties, including many non-state actors. In the actual action, the early action, I would say that in most instances, state actors have the responsibility, the first responder responsibility, I would say. But even there, the example Han gave on the vessel protection detachments, which used to be government Marines, and now are also private companies. That's where the two worlds tend to meet. So, for better or worse, I mean, there are some arguments that you should keep that in state hands, the monopoly on violence. But we live in a grey world.
Okay, then we have another question that needs answering, and it's been sent already twice. It's actually the question on, because not only does France, but also Denmark and our country as well, we contribute to the counter-piracy operation in the Straits of Hormuz. And this particular viewer is interested, and may I start with you, Admiral, if we already have some lessons identified, some lessons learned from these operations that you would like to share with the audience today.
At the very beginning of this operation, as you remember, things were going bad between the west and the east coast of the Gulf. And so the US were gathering people in the Sentinel operation. And we, with other friends, we thought that it will antagonize things and that we were less able to monitor the route to war. And so the idea was to gather ourselves, and as I explained, to put lights in the streets, to be there, and to make it less difficult, more difficult, less possible to make some gray zone operations. So you remember it was a time where you had lumped mines on tankers and things were going bad. So the lesson is that we were able to do it very fast. It was a light headquarter, so not much people. The costs were under control, and the cooperation was good, the intel was good. And so I think today it has proven its efficiency. So it's really a good example of what can be done, triggered very quickly.
Also in terms of decision making.
Yes, and it was a political stage and military stage, and it worked quite immediately. So I think it's a good lesson. It's in my third part of my speech. It's where I see hope in the situation that when the countries want to do something, really it works in the maritime domain.
Well, I can only subscribe to that. It happens to be one of my colleagues who is the head of the group of the political part of it, and it's very unbureaucratic and it's straightforward, easy, even in these times where you deal with each other on video cameras rather than sitting there.
Maybe that's because it's more.
No, but honestly, yes, a lot of papers are not there. You just talk and do things, and then we have very capable, NATO people to do the work.
Okay.
No, not really. I subscribe to the previous two speakers. One thing that strikes me again, this is not a lesson that is new, but that it's a lesson, well, maybe not learned. Well, it's that military solutions can only be never the full solution. They must be part of a comprehensive approach. You've learned the lesson yourself in Afghanistan. You've been to Afghanistan. You've learned that lesson again there. Same goes here. I mean, it can never be a full solution, and it needs to be incorporated in a political solutions.
Yeah, well, in terms of the Dutch contribution to it, what I found fascinating, of course, is that the Dutch government, that is now a caretaker government, and it consists of 4 parties. 3 of them you could describe as being Eurosceptic, one of them being very pro-European. It was actually a pro-European party that stalled the decision-making forever. The Dutch government making a positive decision and a positive contribution to it. I'm very happy to hear that it was efficient. I'm also very happy to hear that it was effective, because that's even more important.
Yeah.
So this lays the groundwork for naval operations. I'm a fan of naval operations for exactly the reason that you described. You called it the toothpaste approach, because unlike many of the land operations that I have as a member of parliament, I think for about 10 times I put up my hand in order to okay a land operation somewhere around the globe. It is always a matter of how to get out. What is your exit strategy? Is it end of state or end of date? With a naval operation, none of these political hazardous points do come up. And my experience is that, well, in the political domain here in the Netherlands, you will never win an election over a foreign policy issue, but you can very easily lose a government.
I have a particular question to you, Mr. Beckert, because we've been talking about counter-piracy and the Gulf of Guinea, but now this particular question goes to your favorite, the North Sea.
Right.
And so the question is what would be your assessment on Russian maritime projection in the North Sea in your 2035 perspective?
Well, let's say that there's not a genuine traditional military threat. Russian fleets sailing into the North Sea and taking over and having huge traditional battles between navies. It's very much in the hybrid realm, so in the grey zone confrontations. We have signs that the Russians are building up capabilities to do seabed warfare, so cutting or tapping undersea communication cables. They have the ability to do that. You can, by the way, launch that not from naval ships, but from commercial ships. So you have submersibles, unmanned submersibles that you can launch from basically any ship. With the increase of, let's say, vital infrastructure at sea, where a lot of our energy production is done on sea, comes from the sea. Cyber operations, cyber resilience at sea is as much a concern as it is on land. Of course, we know about the mixture of criminal, terrorist, state-backed hacker firms, basically that take control over or do ransomware attacks or whatever.
Have you been in touch with the additional questions that just came up? Are you guys in contact on WhatsApp? Because the follow-up question actually goes into that, and it says that considering the recent cyber attacks attributed to certain state actors and the continuing serious attacks in general, what are your views on the risk of deliberate cyber attacks, including GPS spoofing in the North Sea or in other strategic EU waters, that may cause serious disruption to the sea lines of communication? And do you think we have adequate means to counter such attacks?
So even questions. Yeah, I do see that threat. The North Sea becoming more congested. We've had the incident in the Suez Canal, of course, of the tanker running ashore and blocking the whole Suez Canal. A similar event can happen indeed in the North Sea. If you have the approach routes to the Rotterdam harbour, which are relatively small and shallow, the big cargo ships can only pass through a very narrow waterway, a very narrow lane. If by accident or by intent a ship sinks there, we're in deep trouble. It takes a whole lot of time to remove that ship, and in the meantime, it's difficult to maneuver and navigate there. Cyber attacks, we haven't quite seen much of that. We of course had the attack to the mask systems, but those were onshore systems, so that's not so much in the North Sea as well as in the harbor infrastructure. But certainly those risks mount as they do everywhere, not just in the maritime domain. And we see a mixture of criminal, terrorist, and state activity there, where it's difficult to attribute who's doing what. And certainly, states can use proxy actors to create chaos or whatever. They can do that in the maritime domain as easily as they can do it on land.
Admiral, would you like to share your view on the potential of cyber attacks in the maritime domain?
On GPS, in the Eastern Med, we have what we call in French Navy an electronic war.
And okay.
Because jamming is happens very often, which is the GPS spoofing. So it's a reality. We know that it will, if crisis raises, this will be the basic issue that will happen. So we train our forces to operate without GPS. We have our officers who still play with the sextant. That's right. We do it even on Cairo. We spent 1 week without SATCOM to be able to operate without SATCOM. So we rely on other systems with HF. It's not but we can transmit orders and exchange data. Right. Other means than satellite. And so the question, the broader question is resiliency. I think the maritime domain has taken great advantage of freedom of navigation, freedom of sea. It was something. It was cool, a cool area, and today is coming back to war fighting, and even for commercial. And so we had a discussion, for example, with SEMA CGM about how enhancing their cyber protection, because these huge ships are controlled by computers. They need SATCOMs, they need SCADA systems to operate their engines. And so all of us must cooperate to have a better protection, especially against cyber attacks, which first aim is to disrupt the commercial issues, to ransomware. I've heard, I don't know if it's true, but it was a ransomware on a disembarkment system for cargo ships. That happened once, and so they had to pay, to disembark containers. So it's commercial is the first target.
Okay.
I can only add to this maybe a topic that has not been mentioned yet. Let's put the periscope on submarines. And if you talk about intelligence operations, of course, the Netherlands is still in the process of making decisions on this, but I think submarines are also extremely important here. And seabed, Frank already alluded to that. Seabed movement. But submarines also play an important part in both offensive and defensive operations in cyber warfare.
Yes, that's right. For the French, the core of the subject is the deterrence. So we have 4 SSBNs, which are operating 7 days, 24 since 50 years. And then to protect these submarines, we need SSNs. And these SSNs are at stake today with a bigger pressure of Russian Navy in the Atlantic. So all of us are concerned by these actions. Are doing all the spectrum of the submarine missions.
Can you give us an idea how much bigger the Russian presence is underwater?
In fact, that there was after the fall of the wall, they nearly disappeared, and since 2010, they regularly enhanced their presence.
Yeah.
So they went back to the Med. Today there are 4 SSKs which are based in Tartus. They come with SSNs in the Med from time to time, and in the North Atlantic they operate more and more submarines, more and more frequently. And it's so for all of us, it's much more complicated to deal with all these targets, some noisy, some very silent, and which task is to put pressure on our military credibility.
One remark,
Sure.
two actually, I can assure you that the commercial shipping companies I know are very much on the top of these things. They do spend a lot of money to protect themselves and harbors and so on.
Yeah.
One thing. Second, these risks that are definitely there, we can defend ourselves, but we might also consider to have an offensive capability. And that is the discussion, at least in NATO and other places. Do we need that? Is that morally a thing we can do? Yeah, if we hit the right people, so to speak, or aggressors, say, potential aggressors. So there we are.
We have it, we need
Yes,
it,
we do.
and we're using it.
And
that's not the right thing to do.
Yeah, if you remember, in 1917, the submarine worker was illegal.
Yeah, the thing about offensive cyber is that the more effective it is, the less you hear about.
Yeah, no.
Or
Stay
or
quiet.
possibly the other way around. You have to keep it quiet to be effective.
Yes, exactly.
And if it's not quiet again, we will offer a new Hugo Grotius, make it legally.
Okay, gentlemen, guests at home, we have come to an end of this round table session where we have been focusing on Europe, of course, and the role Europe ought to be playing in the protection of our blue waters. We've had some really positive remarks, of course. You, General, you do have hope, and we've actually talked about some of the operations like Atalanta, who were very successful, not only, I would say, on the ground, but in this, say, in the water, but also in terms of decision making. That was quite remarkable to hear about that. And we also have learned from not only the questions, but the debates amongst yourself, how we are really seeking for solutions, not only military solutions, political solutions, economic solutions, but also including these non-state actors and the NGO question that came up. And of course, the cyber attacks, very common to everyone, I would say, nowadays in the world. And the eminent question that's always asked, how NATO and EU should be cooperating, was addressed as well. So thank you again for being able to tackle all these issues. But thank you again, Admiral, for your talk. It was quite an inspiring talk, taking us all the way back in history, but also providing us with some hope for the future. And that's always nice to close off with some positive remarks. So guests at home, thank you very much for participating in this roundtable discussion, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you.